Alright, in today's video, Chrysler Slant 6. So we're talking about something that was probably, I don't know, maybe early 70s, mid 70s. Probably came in a Chrysler sedan or car, maybe a Dodge Dart, maybe a Valiant, maybe a Duster. One of those engines was probably in one of those cars at one point or another if you got like a smaller or lower package deal, didn't want a V8 in one of them. But I'm not a Chrysler guy. I could be completely wrong, but that is what I think this engine probably came out of. More likely a Valiant, just based on the engine VIN and what I could find on it in service information. Right now what we're going to do is we're actually going to get this engine to slowly crank. And when I say slowly, that starter is drawing a lot. It's junk. It should be rebuilt or replaced. So this only spins the rotating assembly at maybe 5 to 10 RPM, so not a whole lot, but it gets us enough to where we can see what's going on in the valve train itself. So this is a pushrod motor, so we should be able to see everything that happens as the crankshaft spins. What we're going to do is, for one cylinder, we're going to do a compression test. Is it going to be accurate? Probably not. We're a little bit too slow in the crankshaft revolution. As well as to get this engine freed up, I did put ATF inside each cylinder just to loosen up, so it would be more of a wet compression test more than anything. And after we are done with that and see what number we get, then we'll go to a leak down test and see what probably known good looks like and what known bad looks like. So let's do a compression test. I'm going to try to get this thing to crank over. Let's see what numbers we get. So we start at 0 all the way to 300 psi. Let's see what happens. And we have contact. I think we'll call that a day. I think that should be good enough. Like I said, not quite the same as if I were to have it in a car with a known good battery and no good starter and have everything in place. But let's see what we got. We have around 120 psi, and that's like, it looked like that's where it wanted to stay. So we're going to call 120 psi from factory using old service information. And when I say old service information, I mean really old service information. I was able to find that for a compression test, they would like between 90 and 110 psi. Now, take into account for the automatic transmission fluid that's in the cylinder walls, 120, okay, that's a wet compression test, so we'll accept that. We'll say that that cylinder's healthy. So that was cylinder 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That was cylinder 3. So we know cylinder 3 is known good and healthy. So we'll relieve the pressure. Start from 0. Now let's do a leak down test. So the reasons for a leak down test is compression test, yes, that'll tell me if there's mechanical failure somewhere in the engine. A leak down test is a little more accurate though. That can tell me, is it bottom end as far as piston rings, maybe a hole in the piston? Is there something wrong with the actual cylinder itself? Do I have a wash down cylinder? Or is it something up top? Is it a failure in a valve? Do I have a burnt valve? Do I have a bad seal surface between the valve face and the valve seat, or something else along the top of the head? That's the questions that can be answered with a leak down test. I can determine if it is bottom end or if it's top end, which is big, because if you're diagnosing a car for a customer, it's a lot more reasonable to remove a cylinder head and have valve work done than have the bottom end of an engine go. In most cases, you're better off just getting a brand new engine at that point, instead of having it completely rebuilt, at least in today's world. So let's go ahead. We're going to do a leak down test. We're going to try cylinder 2. And the reason why I say cylinder 2 is we're going to look at known bad first. So known bad on this gauge. So this is what a leak down tester looks like. So in percentage, we're looking at how much we're actually leaking the air that we're putting into the cylinder. So for green, we have 20% or less. For moderate, so we're kind of worn in, we're talking about 60%. And then for all-out failure, next to no, next to nothing, we're just leaking all that air. That's going to be in the red. So green's good, red's bad, yellow's in between. So what we have is a gauge between 0 and 100 psi. What we're going to do is we're going to try to crank that up as much as we can to simulate what we just did with the compression test. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook this up And honestly, the difference between compression test and a leak down test is compression test, you're making the cylinder do the work to put pressure up to the gauge. Leak down test, you're making the gauge put pressure into the cylinder and seeing how much of the air leaks out, whether it's top or bottom. So here we go. First thing I want to tell you, if you notice, is the intake valve is open for here. It's slightly open. So what can I expect? I can expect that I'm probably going to have a huge leak. That's probably going to leave me in the red. And what I'll probably hear, so if I'm diagnosing this car and let's say there's something wrong with the intake valve, what I'm going to hear is I'm going to hear that air escaping through the intake. Same with if it was the exhaust valve, I would hear the air escaping through the exhaust valve. Or if it was leaking past the piston rings, let's see the rings have started to fail, I would hear that through the crankcase. So I could remove the oil dipstick, or I could remove the oil cap, and I'd probably hear that in the crankcase itself. If it's through the head gasket, might make the coolant bubble. You know, it can shoot you. Yeah, shoot you. That's what I want to say. It can shoot you. No, it can point you in any direction as far as what the failure might be. So go ahead. Let's turn this guy up, and let's add air into this guy and see what we got. So here I go. I'm taking air. I'm cranking the pressure up. Okay, we're at 100 psi, and look at that. No good. But you can hear, probably on the computer, we have air leaking. It's leaking out through the intake. I can actually put my hand over the top and I can feel it moving the air. And that's because that valve is open. So this would be, let's say if I have a burnt valve or a valve that's broken or something, this is what I would get, red. I am leaking almost 100% of that air that I'm pushing into the cylinder, and it's leaving. So that's just one example. Now let's take a look at known goods. So I'm going to back off the throttle just for a minute, and I'm going to take this, I'm going to disconnect it, and now I'm going to find a cylinder that doesn't have any of the valves actually closed. So it looks like cylinder 3 is my best bet at this point. So we're going to take the adapter out of, let's say, cylinder 3 for the compression tester, and we're going to tap into that one since both of those valves are closed at this point in time, which means it's on the compression stroke, probably very close to top dead center, or TDC. So there we go. We remove the adapter for that one. Make sure you don't mix them up because you can actually get the wrong test results if you do mix these adapters up. I'm going to go ahead, spiral this in to where the spark plug hole would be, and now we're going to hook up the leak down tester. And let's do the same deal. Both valves are closed. If the rings are good, if the valves are sealed, we should be in the green. So let's go ahead. Let's start cranking air pressure in this guy. And look at that. Nearly perfect. Remember, I do have ATF fluid in here, so that's helping seal a little bit better than it normally would, but that is excellent. So we're losing very minimal amount of air through the rings and anywhere else where the air can escape. So this is very good. That is brand new. That is perfect. That is what you want to see with a leak down test. Now remember, the yellow is kind of an in-between where, okay, the motor's kind of worn, rings are starting to get a little worn out, but red, no way. Even if it's on the close side of orange, usually you can suspect something is wrong. But here, right now, both valves are closed. Don't really feel anything through the crankcase. That is beautiful. That is perfect. And that is the basics for compression test and leak down test. Now, there is more than that with the compression test, but I really want to hone in on what you're doing with a leak down test. So let's say if the rings were shot and I had extreme blow by and this guy had an oil consumption problem, if I were to do that test, I would probably hear the hissing through the crankcase because it's making it past the rings and it's not sealing properly against the cylinder walls, and I would hear the air hissing from the crankcase itself. So that would be another one. But this engine is pretty fresh. It just sat for a very, very long time, but it's pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, just because I can, I am going to let this motor crank over just so you can take a look at the valve train since we have the push rod style, and notice when each cylinder is on the compression stroke, there is a hesitation moment where both valves just stay closed. So you'll see open, closed, pause, open, closed, pause, open, close, pause. So take a look at that. Like just narrow down, hey, I'm going to focus on this cylinder and watch as the valves open and close, and then they take a slight pause. That's how you know that that cylinder is on the compression stroke, because both valves are closed at that time. You're building up compression as that piston reaches close to top dead center. So here we go again. Just because we can. And contact. I will go a little more. Now, before I leave, the one thing I can say is that the oil pump is definitely primed at this point, because this thing is making quite a bit of a mess. If you couldn't see, I do have oil pressure now at the rockers. You can see the oil is literally pretty much lubricating everything, including the floor at this point, because I do not have the valve cover on. But that's a good sign. Hopefully we can get this engine running this school year, and we're already halfway there. We just got to get a few other odds and ends taken care of, and this guy will be ready to fire up. But that is what I want to show you guys for today, was really showing you how the valve train works in this pushrod engine, as well as doing a leak down test and a quick compression test as well.